Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Earlier this year, 2020, I came across a YouTube video that quite frankly shared an astonishing story of the likes to which you might say it might be once in a lifetime that you hear. In this particular story, I came to learn that here in the United States, as we seem to believe we're a sovereign nation, that in fact we weren't. That in fact for many, many years, decades in fact, that we were actually under British rule. But along came an opportunity where an 18-day window seemed to appear in which one individual who had been studying the state of our nation finally discovered the opportunity to actually plant the flag and make us a sovereign nation. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who could be considered a national, if not a world hero, who actually held the key to restore truth, honor, and dignity. For 2 decades, our guest has been using the universally recognized flag laws plus his secret weapon, a mathematical language called quantum grammar, to disqualify the constructs of hundreds of corrupt governments and global organizations to steer them away from using their powers unjustly against the people. In his latest documentary film, which can also be found on YouTube, titled Last Flag Standing, he brings closure to the 2000 Florida Chads, which marked the end of the United States of America Corporation as a result of the third and final U.S. bankruptcy of 1999. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today Russell J. Gould. And we'll get more into what all that means in the meantime, but I'd like to welcome Russell to our program today. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the kind introduction about a world that most people probably haven't looked at and studied, which is, kind of a boring thing called international bankruptcies. And, I was blessed enough to dive into books at an earlier age and figure some things out and put a stance to safeguard the people. I was born in this country. I was born out in Seattle, Washington, and I moved out to Lander, Wyoming when I was in high school. And I love the people here. I love the land. I'm a layman, everyday American. I love the people. I work hard. I value hard work, and I've been taught in the ways of putting, as a foundation. And it took me into a life of studying grammar and the order of operations of words, and it kind of led me down the rabbit trail, so to speak, of foundation our values of our land and for the people in a now space scenario. And so this is kind of what I've put my life around 4 years. It's been a very difficult there's been many sacrifices out of my life for the chance to come to speak with your audience.
Now, one of the biggest things, as you just mentioned, is language. And for many, many years, I became fascinated with that myself, especially when it comes to the idea of law and order, as it's called, or the judicial system. And you realize they've made this whole thing so complicated that you actually need to bring in lawyers to interpret things and so forth and so on, and they found ways to get around and make things mean other than what they actually are, that sort of a thing. But putting all that aside, I actually watched your most recent documentary, which has to do with the upcoming presidential election of 2020, of which we all know is a big contentious event. In fact, from all the presidential election cycles that I've been alive to see, this has to be the one that has not only just gripped the United States, but the world. So let's talk about what your involvement with the upcoming presidential election exactly is.
Sure. As you know, because of the bankruptcy, if you watch my film Last Flag Standing, there's enough closure in there to give a background about how the post office was a central figure in authorizing what we call the shipping lanes, or the transportation ways of how we navigate from point A to point B. One of those criteria deals with what they call foreign vessels in dry dock. And a foreign vessel in dry dock gets its registration through the Department of Transportation. And Daniel, this is where, like, when you go to a courthouse, you have to show your ID, which is your transportation shipping document to come in and out of that foreign vessel. Well, on October 1st, 2004, I became chief judge of the U.S. Supreme Court. And what that meant was they took a gold coin filing for me as a filing fee, and I held trial disqualifying I'm the only sitting person in the history of planet Earth to disqualify a country's sitting Supreme Court and judicial system. What that meant was they took the fee for freight for the docking fees, and I called all 9 judges to court at 0900.
Now we're talking about the U.S. Supreme Court judges?
We are talking
Okay.
about the U.S. Supreme Court judges, yes. And the value of this, to answer your question, is I will be conducting as Supreme Court judge the credentialing for who's going to be the leader. And so I will be in Washington, D.C., and I will be conducting at my Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. You guys know it as the U.S. Supreme Court. And the world is going to get to see me and my performances of who I am. And I'm guaranteeing the people of this country that the people are going to win this time.
You know, that's very encouraging, because here's the feeling of the message about this election. A lot of people are hanging on for dear life, praying Donald Trump gets reelected because of all that's going on. And then there are some that are extremely nervous, if not bat nuts crazy, about this whole thing. Now, how do you put those people at ease on the one hand, and then the others say, you're going to be called to task now?
Yeah, well, accountability, the grammar, you brought up a good point earlier, Daniel, about how words get mistranslated and words can mean this and words can mean that. In the quantum grammar system, which we've created, it makes accountability where we use prepositional phrase to preposition the facts. So now we can look at the condition of the mind on why the facts were created. So as a judge, as chief judge of the U.S. Supreme Court, we're going to be looking not so much at the subject matter, but at the mechanics of the procedures of how people are getting from point A to point B, because this is where the procedure controls the subject matter. And what I mean by that, Daniel, if I asked the world and I asked you a question, what's the answer to 4 plus 4 divided by 4? You're going to have to do your order of operation first, which means you have to follow the procedure. The 4s are just simply the facts, the nouns, right? They're your facts. So when you follow sequential and follow the mechanics of procedure, this deals with the procedures of foreign vessels in dry dock. This deals with the procedures of foreign vessels of shipping. And this is where my criteria comes in as the bearer of the flag, as the ship owner of the flag for the country, to wield the venue into a location where the people and the condition of mind of those who choose to lead the people gets to be put on full display. So because of the mechanics of some of the things that I'm going to be releasing within the next 48 days, 50 days, 60 days before the election, whatever that timeline may be, the world is going to be able to put that on trial to say, hey, Russell-J. Gould, Postmaster-General, he has maintained the honor of the continuance of the evidence. What that means is in 1999, I became Postmaster General, which means I became and I'm also the bearer of the flag. I have contracts with the Pentagon, who has leased those flags from me so they could go offshore. So there's a pattern here where things have been put in place. I've also elected all 50 states as well as the territories of the former United States of the election ballot fraud is in the electoral college votes. And simultaneously, when I was conducting a military court-martialing against Bush and Cheney, I shut down the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and I have a passing bill as the legislator. And these things will be all coming to the forefront for the people to look at. They can do their own research. They can see how the government has approached me as the legislator and the things that have been put into place so that Congress is now out of the equation. So people don't have to worry about Congress stepping into the election. Simultaneously, the people that are running for election have to change their oaths, change their structures, because I have sued the Federal Elections Commission and disqualified their position even to hold an election simultaneously. So it was a copious task. It took many elections to put this together, but the evidence and the facts will be on the table. But make no wrong about it. The people will be in a position of peace and calmness to know that an American citizen has had their back when nobody was looking. And now that everybody will be looking, they will see calmness, they will see peace, they will see a transition into the quantum system where there is not this fear-mongering, where people learn how to communicate between faiths, between ethnicity, and the terraforming and some of the unfortunate things that we see out here. The quantum grammar system cleans up, as well as simultaneously puts in a function where we kind of clean up the intake of what they're giving us, such as this also looks into the agriculture, the food, the health, and some of the things that have been forced upon the people, such as the genetically modified foods, the 5G, and some of these criteria. And they will be reevaluated, and people will be given a chance of fairness for the longevity and the prosperity of their lives and their loved ones. But it's also a lot of tough love for those people that have done this to us. So it's a double-edged sword there for sure.
Sure it is. And, you hear all this, and I think the biggest word that seems to surface for all of us is the idea of treason. You hear such a big conversation about how our president is being threatened by our own members of government, and it's like, what are you guys doing? You're supposed to be serving us, not beating up on our president, sort of a thing. But what I'd like to do is go back to the Declaration of Independence. Everybody's talking about the Constitution. Now, we've had a couple of constitutional experts on here, and their language as far as what it means to be a sovereign individual, to really live by those things, is the same thing. They're saying it takes a lot of personal responsibility, it takes a lot of courage, but once you're willing to step in that realm and understand how all this works, it doesn't come free and it doesn't come easily, but once it comes and you actually taste real freedom for a change, you won't want anything else, and that's certainly a lot of what you talk about. But I want to go back to the original Constitution, because I know that in your documentary, The Last Flag Standing, which I have now seen twice, just because the first time you're taking it in, and then the second time you're going, okay, now I'm settling in and really grasping what it is that's going on here. But I know the reality of the Constitution is, when you go back to its original, I guess, formation, deals with, for instance, Benjamin Franklin. And I actually read a biography on him, and I was astonished that this guy wasn't such the great American guy that a lot of people who haven't read more into who he is.
I would concur with that. I was blessed enough, because I'm Postmaster General. I went to the Benjamin Franklin, and I opened up the Benjamin Franklin Postal Court in Philadelphia, and they actually opened up the glass casing in the museum at the Benjamin Franklin Post Office, and I got to go in to look at his original bank drafts of how he set this thing up, and it was pretty nefarious. It was pretty much a sellback concept where he was setting up things for other people's benefits, and he did not necessarily have the people's best concerns in mind. And so you can see that in his bank books and some of the transactions that he engaged with when he borrowed the original money for 1.6 million francs. And so, but that all ended on December 21st, 2012. My ex-business partner, David Wincole Miller, and myself organized what we call the Benjamin Franklin Postal Court, otherwise known as the Federal Postal Court. And so we took the country back to its original nativity. The problem was, Daniel, is as the United States came out of bankruptcy in 1999, the original founders of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were not in location to do an amendment and do a correction, nor did the federal government do its job and announce that they needed to reform and have the people come vote on the terms of those contracts. So that was a fraud against the people put on by the Bush gang and the federal judicial system, as well as the U.S. Postal Service, because the U.S. Postal Service became in violation of their own Title 39, Section 101, Subsection A and Subsection B, when they tried to pull off the Florida Chats in 2000 with the presidential election. Then, to add insult to injury, they used the Constitution as a bank draft charter for an international bankruptcy, where they slipped the guidelines on in how to elect a president. That's why when Barack Obama came into office in 2008, he didn't have to be a U.S. citizen because there were no guidelines for the enforcement of what a president was. So the courts have been on this, the post office has been on this, and the top end of the military has been in on this. Now the people are waking up. I'm giving them correctness. And you know what? The beautiful thing in the end, Daniel, truth wins.
Right. Sometimes it's painful and it's a long road, but when it occurs, you really feel liberation. But then all of a sudden, something else comes in and knocks that off.
That's a fact. And so to go back to your original question, my job is to be a neutral function so that not only is the land of this country intact when this chaos is over, because, there's a lot of vulnerability as, we've, not the American people. Now, let me clarify. The American people themselves have not been out engaged in setting up fake wars and going to bombing countries, but it's been, unfortunately, the leaders that have been put in position that have engaged in this huge monopoly of money from this military complex for the lockdown of the police state of the world. And we've been busy bombing other countries. Now, Daniel, don't you think other countries are seeing us self-destruct from the inside?
Well, they're certainly getting a front row seat of it, especially with these things such as Black Lives Matter and Antifa, these uprisings that are funded definitely. And I mean, everybody's seeing that. It's really fascinating as you watch, for instance, those who really are beginning to pay attention a lot more, how it's been stretched out, and people say, well, why is our current president allowing, for instance, these cities to be destroyed and burned? And I said, well, to me it became obvious because you got to get to a point where you say we've had enough, that if he had stepped in prematurely to stop all this or to help out to keep this from happening, then you wouldn't believe it. He would just be another dictator imposing his will on the people. But in this case, the people are saying, this is ridiculous. These are supposed to be government officials, supposed to be protecting the people that are in these cities, and they're not doing anything.
Well, what if all of that scenario was fake? See, he really doesn't have a flag. He really doesn't have a post office. He really doesn't have a military. He really doesn't have a treasury. He's really just standing there doing nothing. And what's happening is we are being destroyed from the inside out, and they're allowing this to happen. So it's my job to guarantee the American people that I will be there when this election goes down, to make sure not only are our borders secure, because the main concern is, as we've been out for years, not the American people, let me clarify to the world, the American people love their loved ones. They love their families. They love to do their hobbies. They love to participate with their friends. But we have been put in a position where our leaders have been bombing other countries. What happens when those countries see us start collapsing from within and we're all looking from within? What happens to our borders at that point? The U.S. military better get on its toes, better get on the keel, and get on the helm so that they can see that the Postmaster General and Commander-in-Chief's coming into the space. And I'm guaranteeing the people of this country that our borders will stay secure, that we will not be attacked from our enemies that are many from abroad. Because have you ever traveled much abroad, Daniel?
Absolutely.
Do you think the American citizens are really loved out there?
Well, that's for sure.
We are loved, but in other countries where we've been bombing, we are hated. And so we've unfortunately have put positions, and we've had leaders in that have been selling our goods for destruction tools to other nations, to other cartels. And upon doing so, it leaves vulnerabilities where they use our own technology to come in and get us. So these are things that are, for national security, the country is on, better be posted on high notification on this day, that we are to safeguard our borders, because we are being destroyed from within right now. And the world is watching and it's very serious.
Now let's go ahead. It'd be easy as you get excited about all these possibilities or these realities are about to occur, but rather than being emotional and getting caught up in that discussion as a lot of people are, I want to get back to just straightforward, I guess, logic. So let's go ahead and talk about, for instance, you brought up your title of Postmaster General of the World. Now, as people go to see this documentary, they begin to understand that the flag is more than just a symbol. And what happens in that flag, in that construct, the Title IV flag that you actually had patented through the United Nations, who's another entity that everybody seems to be concerned that's supposedly going to come in and control us and do all these crazy things. But you did all these things through the United Nations, you know, for instance, registering the flag, so forth and so on. But let's talk about the flag and you as Postmaster General of the World and what that means.
Yes. Okay. So the umbrella arm for all post offices in the world is what they call the Universal Postal Union, and they're located in Bern, Switzerland. And as I maneuvered myself in the construct of the flag, when the United States came out of bankruptcy, I ended up disqualifying the Universal Postal Union's charter, and I found it to be 100% fraud based upon the grammar that they were tendering. I then went to the Universal Postal Union and sat down for 4 hours with their 3 top leaders, as well as the United States leader for the Universal Postal Union. His name was William Gunderson. This was on June 18th of 2003 in Bern, Switzerland. The disqualification of all sea lanes on the planet was put together by me because of the grammar of what the countries were trying to use to move money, to move militaries from point A to point B. Because I have classified knowledge in those fields, I became the Postmaster-General. When I went to the United Nations, the head of the Postal Administration, Robert Gray, for the United Nations, in April of 2003, met with me for about 45 minutes. He admitted that the United Nations is a fraudulent organization that has zero authorization anywhere on the planet. And they will come under the grammar construct, but I said, you can't come under the grammar construct because you're flying 3x5 boat flags out of every embassy, and they have spears when you walk in the embassy on the top of all their flags, which means they're at war with their people. And I actually had a conversation with over 82 ambassadors from 82 different countries. And each ambassador confessed to me that the United Nations was a fraudulent organization and was set up for a war machine against the people of their countries. So it was quite a conversation because of how I positioned myself within their construct and paradigm. The United Nations Postal Administration concurred that they did not have the right to move any military troops anywhere. So I want the citizens of this country to know that there's not going to be any UN troops knocking on their door. That's just not how it works, right? Because I already stopped that. Stopped that.
I know it was funny because I came across some information where this young millennial says, well, you know, who is the United Nations and what kind of power do they hold? And this was just this young girl that it was really impressive how intelligent she was about describing all this. Quite frankly, I was a little bit ignorant. You know, I knew who the United Nations was, but like probably a lot of American people, you'd rather just go about your lives going to barbecues and trying to look to your future and making sure your kids are safe and educated. But she was simply saying, these guys are pretty much powerless. Here's all it really is. And I was like, so what's all this fear nonsense they're putting into people, you know, about them coming in, as you said, with the troops and taking over. And, you know, now we've got the idea they might be forcing vaccines and so forth and so on. But let's go ahead and get back to this Postmaster General conversation, because I think this is really fascinating when people understand the flag is more than just some sort of a symbol of a nation.
Yes. The flag, the bearer of the flag actually can set the terms of the contract to those who come in and out of contract with that, like a federal contractor. It's a federal contractor symbol. And so it is what they use, what they call the law of the flag. And when you go study the law of the flag, you'll find the bearer of that flag is basically can set the terms. Well, the terms that I'm setting is simply grammar. I'm allowing businesses and corporations and countries to come in and out of the grammar construct under criteria of function of procedures of words. And those procedures of words, we don't let the words hurt the people because there's criteria of fairness, of oneness within the construct of the quantum system. And so the citizens, as they learn to use the quantum system, they no longer get hurt by the paradigm of these words that these big entities are bombarding upon us. And so it's a very valuable tool as you learn how to navigate. And the world's going to get to watch me in this election thing coming up here. And I'm real excited for the world because you're going to get to see the paradigm of the now space and the freedom that's within that paradigm. It's very peaceful. It's not what you guys think, right? It's not that we're out here creating war, chaos, throwing bricks through windows. That's not what this is about. This is about coming to a peaceful solution to communicate so that we can all learn to get along.
So let's talk now about quantum grammar. As I was talking or introducing you to the listeners, it was Colin Russell -J Gould. Now, what does all that mean?
Okay. So let me take you back to a simple basic mathematics where you can figure this out in your head. When you go to a bank, say you're going to write a check to yourself, and you print out on your check 30-5. That equals 35. But numbers are nouns, and people are now supposed to be nouns. What happens if you take out the hyphen between that 30 and 5? You create 30 space 5. You create 305. Point being, you've changed the conditions and you lost control of your subject matter, which was the condition of the money or the 35. So because I use punctuation within my name, I take control of that fact so nobody can create subjective interpretation on who I am. That's closure.
So it's absolute then, it sounds like.
It's correct.
Mm-hmm.
It's correct. So what it's doing is taking the functions that the world seems to know about, which is mathematics, and it's actually been we've made this very simple. Our when you get into the actual mechanics, the gentleman that set it up was my ex-business partner, David Wincole Miller, and I brought the quantum, the now space aspect to all of this. And the guy made choices in life that I wouldn't have done, and it took him into positions. He's no longer with us. He died a few years ago, but he was doing things that were less than honorable with the technology. And so I've been fighting that for years, and fighting the people that he was in contract with relentlessly for years. So it was unfortunate that he made those choices, but the technology is sound. It gives closure, and it gives the capacity of fairness to where no one can create a subjective interpretation about who you are. And we start that contract out, Daniel, with what we call a claim of the life. And the claim of the life is a foundation of nativity to position yourself as a fact and not subjective interpretation. So hopefully that helps you a little bit on the punctuation, on why I use punctuation within my name.
Well, it absolutely makes sense. And here's what's really unique, as you talk about in the documentary and in the other one that I've seen before that, the big thing was about the birth certificate itself, which apparently doesn't even exist after 1999 anyway. But what was fascinating about that coming up is people seeing this would go, well, I don't know. I'm kind of thinking I'm not so sure that I buy into this so far, but I remember there's a young man I knew years ago. This was right around probably the mid-2000s. And he started talking about, did you know that we're under what's called maritime law and so forth and so on? And I was like, and this was a guy in his early 20s. He considered himself to be a real patriot. So he was talking about a lot of these things. And people would kind of listen with amusement, but mostly they were just maybe being curious. But I was kind of curious what he was talking about. But then you really hit it home about what all that's about. Let's talk about the idea of the birth certificate, British rule, and how they came to basically have America for a period of time.
Yes, what happened is in the original lending and borrowing of the money, it was passed through first by Benjamin Franklin to King Louis in France. And he lent Benjamin Franklin 1.6 million francs. As time went on, King Louis sold that note to a banking family. And then that banking family took that and created terms And basically, when you look at so George Washington, when he first went to coin money, and I have a copy of the money that he coined was called the Unity-States of the America. Well, King of France is like, you can't be in now space jurisdiction. You have to make it united in past tense and put an adverb verb scenario, because you can't be a fact because you're in bankruptcy, and bankrupt people don't have any contract rights.
Wow.
And so as this thing went on and on and on and on, it just built up. And under the 3-strike rule of international 70-year moratoriums of bankruptcy, the United States government came out of bankruptcy on November 2nd, 1999. The last 45 days of that was September 17th of that year. So what that meant was the federal government was actually going to have to leave the District of Columbia. But as they did that in the Florida Chat election, simultaneously when they left the estate, the U.S. Postal Service broke their own code in violation of Title 39, Section 101, Subsection A and Subsection B, because they didn't have a president, and they vacated the Constitution because there were no original signers of the Constitution around to re-up the contract. Because the first rule of contract is you got to have joinder within in order to state a claim within the construct, right? If you and I walk into, say you and I go into In-N-Out Burger, right?
Right.
And we try to order a Whopper. That'd be like us trying to order a Whopper there. We don't have contract. In-N-Out Burger doesn't have contract with the Whopper. Well, the same thing happened when we came out of bankruptcy. There were none of the original founders around to re-up the contract because the payment was already complete. The fee for freight had been completed. And they certainly weren't going to announce that they had a problem and they needed to reauthorize, because that would have stopped all this chaos that they were planning for us right now. Right?
Right.
They didn't fix the problem, Daniel.
Oh.
And that's what's coming up is the fix on the problem. I have the flag, which gives me the credentialing to direct, and I call it the directors party, to direct the campaign so that the people get that fairness that we all deserve. And I'm not talking about a hand up, because there's real value and real satisfaction in a day's work.
I agree with that 100%. And I know that as we take a look at this aspect of this whole story, I remember in your documentary that you and your grandmother sort of had a bet about the 2000 election. And that was, yes, you believed and you knew actually that, no, there won't be a president elected in 2000. Now, here's the wild part about this. Let's say that people hear this story here about George W. Bush allegedly becoming or elected into the president of the United States. Anybody who remembers the election of 2000, there was the Florida count and the fraud that was allegedly going on. So there was nobody really established on that night. Now, since then, it's been different. However, that being said, 2020 seems to be right now going in the same direction as 2000 is.
Correct, but now they don't have a Supreme Court to go to because I'm it.
Wow. Huh.
That's the difference now.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have a military because I took control of the martial law and been conducting a military court-martialing. And a lot of this has been kept under national security, Daniel, but it's coming out into the open right now because it needs to. Right? The people need the people need fairness. Look what's happening out here. Right? It's just total chaos everywhere. Nobody's being accountable for anything. And this is what the grammar does, is it preposition sets the facts to put our thinking on trial. Well, if our thinking is happiness and has a boundary of sharing in the things that are out here, man, this is a wonderful technology. But if you're a bad guy trying to steal and think that it's okay to throw bricks through other people's businesses, and setting up a business in this day and age is a very difficult thing because of all the red tape that's out here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for those entrepreneurs that are out there, for me, there's nothing finer than free venture capitalism.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's something I wanted to bring up because we were just on the aspect of British the British colony or the British state, if you will. I don't know how you would put it, but the British owned America. And apparently
Yes.
a lot of people have heard about the Rothschild family, and these guys are, from my understanding, worth $600 trillion. That's a lot of financial power, if you will. But now there's a new sort of bit of information surfacing now about how our current allegedly elected Donald Trump is holding the crown of the Queen, which means that she really isn't the legitimate power of England, but there's actually somebody else in that legitimate royal line. Now, what do you know, or what is your involvement in this for America to be a sovereign nation if this is true? Because, here we're under the impression that when you hear from people that England somehow owns the United States, that sort of thing. But now we've pretty much, from what we're talking about here, realized that's no longer true.
Well, when you look at the mechanics of heraldry, okay, which is the fiefment of what I'm trying to keep this as
it's a new paradigm, so people are going to be looking at this like, are you out of your mind? There's no way this is possible.
Well, okay, so the heraldry that was granted through the lineage from kingship or queenship from generation to generation in England was done under the guise of the Vatican and other churches throughout history. But those paradigms, I have to get into my functions over there. So on June 6th, if you watch Last Flag Standing, I kind of cover it in War Castles as well.
Yes.
I cover,
Mm-hmm.
I cover, that they broke the continuance of evidence on all of that in 2003. And so for Trump, he's just so new onto the scene. He just doesn't, from a tactical command as a global commander-in-chief, when I look at what he's doing, it just doesn't look, he looks real out of place because his mechanics are just wrong. And I'm not trying to be a jerk or nothing. I'm just saying, hey,
Well, no, it makes sense because people really need to come to understand what are the mechanics of this? Why is it looking the way it does, and why does it seem to be working the way it does? Exactly, just like you're describing.
Yes, and so when they broke the continuance of evidence, they actually gave me a contract for this is when I talk about my cosmic crown, my cosmic security clearance. I don't want to get into those details, but a lot of that is covered in that. And Mr. Trump is just not in that location. I'm sorry, it's just not. It is what it is, So for him to be running around, or people saying he has the crown of the Queen was out the door in 2003. Okay. But the world was not aware of it.
Oh, okay.
And in 1999, she was kicked out of the United States. Because they tried to come back in, and they tried to kick off their New World Order thing through Bush. But I called them on the carpet on it, and they darn near killed me over it. But I stood my ground. They know who I am very well, and the good news is, Daniel, the world's going to get to see me get my day. You can count on it.
So, Russell, here's the thing. People, as they come to see and know this story, it's a big thing to really wrap your head around, to realize here's you going up against almost, it seems like, centuries of power, of money, and think, how come if, let's say, Abraham Lincoln or John F. Kennedy or a slew of people, Martin Luther King Jr. is another example, have become assassinated for the ideals of freedom and individual sovereignty, how you've managed to get this far. And they look at this and think, but is this possible? And I know deep inside everybody's got that feeling, I hope so. But it's hard to really look about that. It's like, for instance, you talk about that the Internal Revenue Service was kicked out, that there really isn't a tax collector anymore. Why are we still, having our taxes collected and going to jail and receiving fines? Well, I mean, all these things, you could just see the whole thing there why people go, how is if this is really possible? God, I hope so. But, geez, you can see from all the conditioning, the cynicism, or at least the skepticism of it all.
Well, the international bankers ask the odd question, and after I have the conversation, I've been in many locations in the world. I'll just put it to you like that, and they ask that same question: why aren't you dead? That's the question. It's always the question. And I say, you don't know what you don't know until you find out what you do know. And somebody that is in my position and has created what I've created has been allowed by the grace of God, call it whatever you want, call it divine, call it whatever you want to call it. I can't be killed. And so killers out there, they know that. They've already all come. They're no longer. And they just have to deal with that. And so I have technology that is relevant for the safeguard of this planet and safeguard and longevity of this planet. And I don't know any other way to say it to you, Daniel, but I'm under the grace of if you believe in a God, but I'm in that mercy. I'm in that grace. And I'm a pretty humble guy, and I know that I say some pretty bold things, no doubt. But I can back it because I'm still here, Daniel.
Well, there you go. All we could do is just basically wait and see. Now, here's the thing. I brought up the Internal Revenue Service because obviously finance is something that a lot of us have had controlled in our lives since we started earning a paycheck. Now you have the idea of the technocratic society trying to step in, which we're going to be doing a series of interviews on that through some people that really understand the nature of what that is, what it means. And so when you hear about things such as this new Green Deal and the cost of all that and how they're going to come in and tell us we don't get to have our cars anymore, they're all going to be electric cars, universal income, that sort of a bunch of nonsense. And then the question is, where is it being funded? Getting into finance, now I understand that there is what is known as quantum banking. Now, certainly you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I found out that allegedly that the quantum banking system actually went online in the beginning of August of 2020, that's this year, and that it's supposedly going fully online by January of 2021. Now, first of all, talk about what quantum banking is, because I know that, for instance, Donald Trump moved the Federal Reserve into the U.S. Treasury, and if you've done a little study of money, you realize, well, I think that's kind of a big deal. In other words, he's taking control of the Federal Reserve that's been pulling a lot of the purse strings and controlling people and their money and their lives and their energy. Brought in Judy Shelton, I guess, as the chief, and they're looking to put this whole thing, the money system back on the gold standard, or at least precious metals. Now, let's talk about quantum banking and all that and let people know what's going on there.
Well, I am the author of quantum banking, so the people that you see that are saying this are the people that are plagiarizing my work, that don't have authorization, and that are not living within the construct of the grammar that I've built within the quantum system. The word's out. The people know that they're trying to steal me blind, right? Because I designed all that. The system that I designed in quantum banking allows a different style of structure, which is asset-based banking. Yes, because I'm also in part of my walk and my journey. I'm very deep into chemistry and to transitional chemical and molecular structure. I have my own periodic table. As many of you know that have watched my documentary, and I don't speak about it much, but I work not every day, believe it or not, in a lab dealing with precious metals. So I have copious values that are being transitioned into a location to help the world. But the people that are trying to steal my system, trying to say that they're the ones bringing the quantum banking system, they still don't have a flag to go on the platform. Right? Because the flag still controls who sets the terms. And so for these people to say that they're engaged in quantum banking, yes, it was easy for Trump to go down there because I had already taken out the Federal Reserve, right? So these locations were already defunct when the guy stumbled onto my story, saw the paperwork, and said, you got to comprehend. I spent some time with U.S. Secret Service, right? They know me real well, okay? So because of that, Trump is, like I said, pretty new onto the scene, coming behind things. I don't know what his volition is. I don't, but I know that if he's running for president, that's all fake. But he got into a bad ball game, and he didn't have full closure on the terms. If he would have, he'd have been down when I was hanging out at the headquarters of the U.S. Secret Service trying to help. He would have showed up because he needs a lot of help to help this country.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
for sure. And so yeah, I wish, he's just he's in a different venue. He's in the past and he's in the future. He just doesn't have any connection to the now space, which makes it cool. Makes it good for me and good for the people.
I know that's, when people come to know who you are, and then you realize these big, for instance, peace treaties, and I want to still get back into quantum banking, how that works and what all that means to us, especially when it comes to, we're all hearing about this big global financial reset, but back to the peace treaties, I mean, here was this, 40-plus year, Egypt and, I'm trying to remember, I remember back as a kid when Jimmy Carter was trying to initiate this peace deal between the two nations, and then it finally just occurred under Trump, and then the new one under Serbia and Yemen, this just occurred under Trump. And if people see what you're talking about here and you realize, okay, well, if all this, we're just saying, if all this is true, the quantum grammar and how you affected all this language that you've actually been out there working with these nations, you can see how this becomes at least seemingly easy for Trump to pull all this off, if in fact it has actually happened.
Yeah, he's just coming in after the fact. It's kind of like a Johnny come lately. Like I said, it's me and you holding the flag, walking into In-N-Out Burger, and we get to eat. We get to contract with the In-N-Out Burger and eat that, and he's got to try to order a Whopper, and he has to leave the door. Then it's just how it really is, nothing personal.
No worries. Now, back to quantum banking, the financial reset, the current state of the central banks. How do you think they're going to react to all this as it occurs?
Well, they know my system very well. My quantum banking construct was given to all treasuries for all countries on planet Earth in 2003. So they've been quietly studying behind the scenes. I've met with many of the central banking families, and their concerns were, they were pretty upset about it because it decentralizes their capacity to leverage countries. What that means is
essentially gets rid of their power to a big degree, actually.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, yeah, correct, because it puts the power back into the function of the manufacturing on the people. Right? Or unfortunately, we got this big technocracy coming at us. And so a lot of these corporations that have monopolized their field, so to speak, are in a position where they can lay off the people and put their technology in place. And now they're trying to move themselves into, the human mind and the state of who we are as a people for creativity will be moved out of the way. And so they want their think tanks and their statistical and logistical material readiness teams in place, and really how if they're living a flush life, right, and they're living, say they're making $500,000 plus a year. Well, what kind of connection do they have to the guy that's maybe an electrician, and his needs for his family are so much different, right? So, and yet you have this guy in this bureaucracy tech position giving us what he thinks that we need.
Right.
Instead of going out to the people and saying, hey, what do you need? Somebody asked me the other day, hey, Russell, what are you going to do when if a country comes up to you and they want you to do business with them? I said, well, I'm not going to go talk to them. I'm going to go hang out in the streets, go hang out amongst the people and ask them what they need. Then I'll get back to them. What are the people's needs? Heck with what the government needs. What do the people need? And what do they need now? Well, they need security. They need food. They need good food. They need clean water. Right? They need to be not on the tit of all this fossil fuel and all the hydrocarbons that we have out here perpetrating its conditions on our lives. But it doesn't need to be controlled on a smart meter, right? Because that level of power is not for the people, or not for the corporate structures, for the people. So it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to look at, Daniel, for sure. But my goal is to make sure that people have what they need. And right now we're not seeing that out here. The foreclosures that are coming up next, This is one of the things that I will stop. And the banks have failed, and the banks aren't too big to fail. The banks have failed.
Well, it's obvious because you look at fiat money, for instance, and now everybody's hearing about hyperinflation and how food's going to be not only scarce but too expensive to buy if you can find any. So the big suggestion you're hearing from a lot of financial economist experts, so to speak, is, well, take all your money and buy gold and silver. It's the only inflation hedge. So let's talk about really quantum banking and how this perhaps changes all that for everybody.
It does. It is asset-based banking, and when the quantum systems comes online that I've built, and when I'm in position to delegate certain technologies to people, you're going to see one of the main things that will be lifted immediately, and it doesn't take more than 3 days, is these mortgages. That will all get lifted, and the yoke of that on the people, because you're about to see this huge landslide where people are going to be thrown out of where are they supposed to go?
Right.
Well, then they have a plan for that. It's called their FEMA camps. They got a good little thing that's lined up where everybody can go stand in line. Oh, you're going to have to get your shots as you stand in line too. So, it's a scary thing that they got going on out here. But the FEMA camps will not be used against the American citizens. Period.
Sounds like they're going to be used against someone else.
Well, tough love needs to be going out. There's no doubt about it. And I'm someone that, I'm someone because of my story, and as you know, some of the things that I've been through. I'm a guy that can speak in an authoritative position of someone who's been without food. I know firsthand what that looks like, and I do not wish that upon anyone on this planet. Simultaneously, I know the difference between good fresh food and food that has not been processed just without any love. So there's a big difference. And, the farmers of the world and the ranchers of this country are getting a bad deal in the marketplaces. I don't have to get into all the logistics on the ag and the position of where our farming is. Simultaneously, in the farming's been off because they've had their nice little weather machines on us and been chemtrailing the crap out of us. So it's all been a real fun game to watch, but I'm tired of it.
Well, I think a lot of us are, especially when you think about this COVID-19 coronavirus this year. And when you were talking about, for instance, mortgages, there's also how the government's stepping in and trying to prevent people from being evicted from their rental properties. I mean, there's just so much going on, a lot of pain. And, through this, people have come to find out that when it comes to buying a home, for instance, you take the bank mortgage out, but what if you've paid your home off and now it says, well, then why don't you not pay the taxes on your property and see what happens if you really think that you own your property? So in this quantum banking system, as I understand it from what you describe in your documentary, is this, that it seems that I think it's tied to precious metals like gold and silver that you don't even have to mine, for instance, which is really cool because now you're not destroying the earth.
Yes.
But then the other thing is, it also is a situation that when you think about all the wars and the banker wars, if you go back to all this history here, you realize perpetually, for instance, like the Rothschild family loves wars because they have to lend money to countries to afford to go to war. And this has been going on since even before the days of the Roman Empire. This whole system has been the same as it ever was, as the group Talking Heads would say, okay? And so you look at things such as, mortgages. Now you're in debt, but that's supposedly the American dream, is to own a home. You're paying off a mortgage, and when you don't pay it, you don't own the home. So much for the dream. But that this new quantum banking also seems to be a process that will now eliminate a debt or society, which has been the whole enslavement program for, centuries.
Yes, it has constructs built into it. I don't really want to break those right now. I can give you some, but if you actually own your property, everybody has the right to a space, a location to live, and not necessarily the one that they've been forced into living. And a lot of that gets cleaned up in some of the choices, of education that we've allowed out here to the people. They've put these poor college students into debt
That's been a sad one there. I look at that going, are you out of your mind? The parents sell their kids on a further education. Now the kids are coming out of debt, out of school in debt faster than their parents did 20, 30
Correct.
years ago. And it's sad to see that. It's like you can see where the hope has literally just been expunged almost.
It's a terrible thing, and the education that they're getting is even dumber. The American citizens have been absolutely killed in what we've been given to learn. If we were given correctness, if we were given how to conduct a business and the moral ethics, not only to conduct a business, but to have some moral value and take pride in your work, as well as not try to shortcut every turn because you're trying to pinch a dollar. And so these things I clean up a lot with. I have what's called a consumption tax within the quantum system, and that basically lists the burden of these financial, these children, these kids that are, a lot of these guys are paying their college tuition off in their 40s and 50s. If ever. And so it's been a scam. The educational system will change because it has to. And, the mechanics of where the education system, they're feeding into the judicial system and the fake war on drugs, and it just goes on and on and on and on, as you know, Daniel. And I've chose to put a system in place that can fix that. And so it's been a long quest for me. But back to the quantum banking, it has a consumption tax of 10% in it, right? So you're not taxed on what you make. So you can build equity up, and there is no death tax, right? So you can pass things on in living wills under what we call a featment or tales of the estates or copy of the freeholds, different styles of wills. I'm not going to get into all the legalities on that because different people have different ways of approaching that. But it also has a position in there where, there will be no more IRS. Because the IRS was kicked out of here in 1999, it's just foolish that they're even been allowed to throw people in jail. But it's such a money monopoly of what they've done. So it's about ending that and giving the people the necessary tools so that they can educate themselves and not be a slave to the big tech that's coming at them. Because there's a lot of tech coming at us that we won't even know that we're being manipulated with some of the stuff that they're saying with the 5G and some of the other things that are out there. And they've got everybody so afraid of everything. I mean, the nice thing is, that people have had time to get themselves a little bit of an education because they've not been on the bombardment of going to work all the time. The bad thing is that they've lost their positions with their friends or the hobbies that they love, or they haven't been given their tools. This pantomime of put a mask on, it's quite a thing that they've come up with. I remember when I met with the Deputy Director of Homeland Security on September 9th, 2004. And I went up to their building in Washington, D.C., and they came out and wanted to have a conversation with me. And I said, your organization is fake. It's fraud. They said, yes, Russell, but the American people are such bleeps that they're going to buy into it. So they've been conditioning the people for so long from a psychological standpoint that the people, of course, they're going to fall into the pantomime of the mask, right? Of course, they're going to be afraid of all this. I mean, I hear stories, and I know people firsthand that have put in 25 COVID test things where they just opened the package and broke the package open, sent it back, and all 25 came back positive. Well, how does that happen?
And you bring up something now. I remember when this first got to a point where, I knew people that were going to work and they were, I wonder what I'm going to do. I said, well, let's just say your first safety net is that you can draw unemployment because you're being involuntarily laid off. So this is something that's not in your control. But there was a lot of concern from younger people as they were talking to me, and I swear this is what I say here is true. As I said, I really think this is going to be okay. It's going to turn out pretty good. And there was just an instinct I had that as bad as this looks, or it became, to get to that point that it looks as it does now, that then I felt instinctive, like somehow this is all it's not going to be that bad, right? And so when you look at the idea of the mask, I mean, that pisses me off enough because when you hear what you have just said about these people with the Department of Homeland Security saying, well, we're hoodwinking these people. The sad part about that thinking is this: people naturally want to cooperate for the safety of others. Especially, in America, we're good people. We look out for each other. When you're down, believe me, I've experienced this over and over and over again. Hey, what can I do to help you? This is something that's just in us. That's a beautiful thing. And what sucks, and I say that in all capital letters with the colons and the hyphens, sucks, is this, is that they've used that inherent human nature to their advantage and to a very nasty disadvantage to us. And I want to know, I'm sure everybody does what everything we're talking about here today usher in a new kind of government, not just for America, but the world, and give us true sovereignty? And God dang it, what are we going to get these damn masks off our face?
Well, you know what?
There's my passion.
Everybody simultaneously pull off the mask. Set a date, say we're tired of it, and everybody pulls off the mask. Because I'm guaranteeing I'm going to pull off my mask and go be me. How's the world going to handle that?
Now, how about this technocratic government? Is this going to be dissolved under this new system?
Well, there's good and bad in it. There's a lot of good things as far as travel and technology that's in place, but holding that over people's heads, making them get certain shots or vaccines to even participate with any of that, that's got to go. Some of the style of thinking in there is good. Some of the style of thinking is bad. But it should be up to the people to vote that in. If you're going to have such extreme technology that provides such an advantage for one specific sector or another, then you should make it fair for all.
Wow, it's pretty amazing stuff. I know that when we were talking about the United Nations earlier, that a lot of people are talking about the Agenda 2030 of having all nations be under their currency and government. Obviously, that doesn't sound like that's going to happen.
No, well, they would have to come through the constructs. I have built the world construct on setting currencies. And so they would have to come in compliance with the terms of those constructs. And the terms are, it kind of turns things more over to the people and decentralizes because of the verifications that can be done by the people for their autonomousness.
Gotcha. There's so much to this. The only thing I can say for the listeners out there is go check out the documentary, The Last Flag Standing. I think you're at least going to be amazed by the story, the kind of hope and the power that it does give you. But as we've been saying, and I say this constantly on the show whenever I think that I'm opening a door for listeners, you still need to go out there and do your homework, and you need to take personal responsibility for what happens in your life. So it seems like the final question really with all this is, where do we go, let's say, from today, from listening to this program, moving forward? Where do we go? What do we do next?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm starting to go more public with what I'm doing. And I've been placing that on, and you can share with your friends on what the website called lastflagstanding.com. And they have forms on there for claims for the life as well as publications, because I'm going to be stepping more into the public sector here. And you'll have a watch list and a waiting list, and there's all kinds of things that are on that website. I'm not actually in charge of that website. I'm letting other people handle that because I'm staying Daniel, I love my work. I work for a living. I'm in the lab from 7 to 7 at night. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. They're very, very smart, very intelligent workers, and we have a lot of fun in the chemistry of what we're doing. But I can see myself now kind of moving out of that and moving into more of a public speaking role. It's not really, what I was looking to do in life, but it's what I ended up doing because I have built something that can help the planet right now. And it's actually my space to come forward because of all the chaos and all the things that I built. I can do the performances necessary to safeguard the security of the borders and the people of this country. And you can be, and, if you want to watch that and get involved with that, you can go to lastflagstanding.com. And that will give you, the audience and your listeners, at least a position to follow the story, because they're going to see it. They can either see it there or, I don't know what the mainstream media, they've never, treated me very nicely. And so, but I'm me, you get what you get out of me, Daniel. I'm authentic. And, I don't go in scripted or unscripted. I know what I've built, and I know how to use the technique of the navigation in the shipping lanes, and I'm the best in the world. That's why I'm the Postmaster General of the world.
So I guess my only final question, an obvious one, I'm sure, to the listeners as they've been taking this all in, is this: when can we feel the effects of at least relief from the state of things as they are now?
I agree. Well, what we're going to, first of all, sadly, we get to watch the chaos of fiction try to pull off this fake election, and then they get to watch me and the solutions come to the table.
And an idea of when that November, December?
That'll be in November.
It'll be in November. Okay. And how will they know? I mean, is this just going to be broadcast everywhere? Or,
I don't. Hopefully there's enough film crews that have picked up my story by now, and I think that the people are starting to get behind it, because it's true, right? What I've said is true. I've done all these things, right? So as the people learn and get behind it, they're going to be saying, "Hey, where's Russell?" And then they will see the forensic facts and the forensic proof that I was doing the correct thing, not only for myself, but for the people of the world, the people of America, the people of the whole planet, that I've built a mechanism where we can learn how to communicate in our banking, our day-to-day business, in our health, and our agriculture, and to stop all this foolishness of going to wars over words and treaties that don't mean anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I know, like I said, when I first came to hear about you, it was actually earlier this summer. My wife says, you ought to take a look at this thing that this guy's talking about. She wasn't really sure how to describe it. I believe it was a Secret Service director. I don't know what his actual title was, but he's actually sharing, in which you come to understand by the end of the documentary, because it's called War Castles, I believe. And he says, this is what happened, and he talks about who you are, and I'm like, really? Wow, this is one heck of a story. And for some reason, you kind of intuitively go, this seems to be true. It just makes sense somehow. But boy, it sure is big. So now the next question is it possible? Is the next question. And it's astonishing. Okay, go ahead.
It's happening.
Yeah, well,
it's happening.
Right. And so you kind of knew. Anyway, what I wanted to get at was, so first of all, it's been a wonderful privilege to even be able to have you scheduled on the show. I thought, is this guy ever going to be able to get this guy into, I mean, this is really big. And so I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy to be on our program. I mean, this is what we do. We really try to come out there and say, we're going to present some stuff to you. You guys decide what you think. Do more homework, but don't just sit back and say, well, I think it's true or I don't believe it's true. Get away from all that and start doing some critical thinking. But here's what I want you to know. There was a time I was in a restaurant. This was actually within the last week. And I see this couple, probably in their late 30s, early 40s, and she was on her cell phone, and I seen what was the United States, and it was mostly in red with a couple of blue spots. So I go, oh, you got the map of the United States there on your cell phone. What's that all about? And then all of a sudden I could feel sort of the energy kind of become reserved a little bit. And I was kind of pulling it out of him a little bit, and so we started talking. And what it was is they were taking a look at the upcoming presidential election and how most of the United States was red, so they were Trump supporters. So we got into talking a little bit more, and I actually said, here's this guy, this story you ought to check out, and it was you. So I started to write your name down. His name is Russell J., and before I could finish spelling your last name, they said, yeah, we know who he is. He's actually a guy that has the Title IV flag, and they knew everything about you before I could even say your last name. So there are people out there that really know, in common at least, that know who you are. So this is a real deal, guys. At least so far.
This is it. It's all true. And you'll see. I'm trying to get the U.S. Marshal Service and those guys to start releasing the videos of me in court. There's a lot to it. Of course, there's a lot of names.
I'd love to see that. I would love to see when you were doing that court martial on GW.
Oh, let me tell you, those were classic moves. I was being a commander in chief. I've got all the moves. You can count on it. So anyway, thank your audience. Hey, thank you guys thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'd love to have you back. I mean, I'd like to know that we could just kind of reach out to you anytime, as this evolves and just say, hey, man, because, we're all in this together. As the beginning of the COVID, you kept hearing, we're all in this together. Well, no, you don't hear that message, no, it's all on you now. You're on your own kind. It's like, what the hell's going on here, But, it's great, and I'm glad that we've been in touch. And like I said, it's been a pleasure, really, to have some of your time and just share this. And believe me, I've been cookie feeding it to people like, there's this guy, did you know he recaptured the United States from Great Britain? But that's about as far as I'll go, because they're just kind of looking at you like, all right, well, find out for yourself. I don't know what else to do, and I'm not going to sit there and go crazy on them either. So anyway.
Hey, Daniel, thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your audience for taking the time to share me in your lives. Thank you so much. Thanks for peering into my life, seeing what I'm about. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and blessings to you and your audience.
And the website again is thelastflagstanding.com, where they can find out more. Lastflagstanding.com. Okay, great. Yep. Russell, look forward to talking with you again, and looking forward to see how this all opens up. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you.